Okay, let's talk about working with masses when we're drawing. And we're going to simplify this. We will apply it to the figure, but first we need to practice a few things without the distraction and the difficulty of the figure. So before we get started, I just want to define what a mass is. So mass is just something that takes up space. My fist is a mass. My finger there is a mass. This part of my thumb, that part of my hand is a mass. There's a mass. There's another mass. Here's a mass. This blob is a mass. That's a mass. Just anything that takes up space. It's going to be important for us in drawing a convincing figure to be able to see it in terms of the masses that make it up. And we're going to use a particular shape to help us starting out, which is going to be an ellipse. If I take this perfect circle and tilt it, that makes it into an ellipse. And you can see it's no longer a perfect circle, it's this oval shape. It's an ellipse. And it can be really narrow, wider, or all the way to a perfect circle. So for our purposes, for this drawing, this way of drawing, an ellipse is going to be anything that's has this oval nature. It could be a circle. Just these kind of shapes. We're going to make use of these in the drawing. These are all ellipses. And then the only other thing that we're going to think about is the overlap. And when I say overlap, that's taking two objects where one passes in front of the other. So this one is overlapping this one. And we're going to practice a few things that make it clear why this is important. The first thing we're going to practice, I would suggest that you practice this. It's not something you're going to turn into me, but I would do it in your sketchbook anyway because it's very helpful. And that's just building some simple blobs. So let me build some of these out. Okay, I hope we can agree that all three of these are relatively the same. They're just two ellipses that are intersecting. And that's important because how I deal with the contour line on these is going to go a long way towards describing what's happening spatially, what's happening in space. And it's just going to be a blob this time, but when we're drawing the figure, it might be an arm, it might be a leg, it might be a fold on the stomach. It could be any number of things that we need to describe using these contours. And this is going to help us decide what to do with our contours. So let's say, for instance, I want to turn this into a blob where this is in front and this is behind. The way that I'm going to do that, I'm going to favor the thing that's in front with the overlap. And that happens here at this intersection and here at this intersection. So here's what that looks like. So you can see that favoring this front ellipse in the overlap makes this mass feel like it's closer to us than this one. Well, let's say I want to do the opposite on this one. This is front and that's back. I like to add these little second flips. It makes it seem a little more organic to me. So that's how I might decide which mass is in front of which mass. And you have the power to show us which one is in front of the other one by how you deal with these overlaps. It doesn't take a whole lot and our brain goes, okay, I've got an idea of what's going on here. But what happens when neither one is the case? Well, let's combine both of these where this mass overlaps there and there. Now we get something that's more of a twist. That's going to feel like it's twisting or like a mass bunched up folding. And that's just this overlap facing this way and this overlap facing that way. Okay, so that's one thing to practice. Making these blobs where you decide which mass is in front of which. That's going to be very helpful when it's time to do that in the figure. The next thing that I would practice has to do with the way the body behaves. What this practice is going to deal with is compression and stretch. Because what happens in the body, it's almost like a sock with two tennis balls in it or something. If you compress one end, it's going to stretch the other end, and I'll show you what this looks like. All right, so this might be a side where there's compression. That's these, you're getting this fold here. That would mean this side has stretch. I can go the other direction with it. And maybe I've got one here that's a little more extreme. And maybe the bottom is closer to me. In both of these, the top was closer to me, so it gets the overlap. Maybe in this one, the bottom is closer to me. Sometimes I like to put the axis in. Give us a sense of what the bend is like. That's going to be a really helpful thing to practice too. It's just going to give you experience with your overlaps. That's the important part, is getting comfortable with dealing with those overlaps. So with those two concepts in mind, I can start stacking ellipses on top of each other and come up with a pretty complicated mass, pretty complicated group of masses really, rather quickly. And this is what you'll be doing in your sketchbook. This is what you'll be turning in to me. Okay, so there I just put 10 ellipses on the page, and they're just willy-nilly. I didn't put them in any specific place. It doesn't really matter. What I'm going to do is, now that I have what I'm going to call the cloud of ellipses, this is my cloud, I'm going to decide what my contour lines are doing. With this, since it's abstract, it doesn't relate to anything, I can kind of decide arbitrarily. It doesn't have to be based on anything, but when you're doing the figure, when you're doing this approach with the human figure, you'll look at the figure and decide which of those masses that I saw is closer to me. You'll use the figure that you're observing to give you the information on which of the masses should be in front, which should be behind. So I'll just go through and put that contour line in. I'm not going to go crazy with it, but there will be some line variety. All right, so there's my cloud of ellipses with the contour lines described. And if I want to, I can take this kneaded eraser and go through and just clean up any lines that might be distracting. You don't have to go crazy with this. I wouldn't go crazy with this, just kind of cleaning up anything that seems like it's getting too much attention. Like that's not as clear as it could be, so I'll chase that back just a little bit. I'm not going to worry too much about that little line that's hanging out. All right, so that's not anything, but it is 10 ellipses, all of which were intersecting, and then I went back in with the contour line to describe what's happening. And you get this sense of solidity just using those ellipses and just deciding how the contours overlap.